weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
The top business stories live from the Sky News room. Breaking news this afternoon, a significant blow for the Chancellor as AstraZeneca drops plans to build a £450 million vaccine manufacturing plant here in the UK. Bracing for tariffs, Donald Trump expected to hit Canada and Mexico with a 25% levy on imports tomorrow. Plus, remember this, 5 years on from Brexit, but is the UK better or worse off? Very good afternoon and welcome to Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. Thank you for your company on this Friday afternoon. And we start with breaking news, and that is the pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca has said it's pulling out of plans to build a £450 million vaccine manufacturing plant on Merseyside. The move by the UK's biggest company is a blow for the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who announced plans just this week to kickstart the economy, including investment in life scientists. Well, in a statement, the company said, following discussions with the current government, we are no longer pursuing our planned investment at Spike. Several factors have influenced this decision, including the timing and reduction of the final offer compared to the previous government's proposal. The site will continue to produce and supply our flu vaccines for patients in the UK and around the world. Well, let's speak to Hannah Kushler, who is Global Pharmaceutical Editor at the Financial Times, who joins us this afternoon and broke that story. Hannah, good to see you. Just explain what has gone on here. Essentially, AstraZeneca disappointed with the government.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, for them to come out and say that, it sounds like quite a reserved statement. But I think behind the scenes, there's a lot of real frustration bubbling at AstraZeneca and across the life sciences industry, which is a really important industry for the UK. It's actually the biggest private investor in R&D, and AstraZeneca is the largest company on the London Stock Exchange. So they're very frustrated because the Conservatives offered them a deal which we think was maybe worth about 90 million in order to make this 450 million investment in Merseyside. The new government came in and they took months to actually come up with a proposal. And when they did, it was far, far less. By the sounds of it, about 40 million. They then said no, and there was this tension for quite a while. And this is just the end of all those talks, because what they came back with just doesn't sound like it was anywhere near that 90 million.
Though, Hannah, we have had a statement from the government in the last couple of minutes or so. This is what His Majesty's government is saying, that a change in the makeup of the investments originally proposed by AstraZeneca led to a reduced government grants offer being put forward. All government grant funding has to demonstrate value for taxpayer money, and unfortunately, despite extensive work from government officials, it has not been possible to achieve a solution. AstraZeneca remains closely engaged with the government's work to develop our new industrial strategy, and more broadly, we continue to have a thriving life sciences sector with £108 billion to the economy and providing over 300,000 highly skilled jobs across the country. That is what the government are telling us this afternoon, but be in no doubt, this is a significant blow.
The timing is so bad, right? Rachel Reeves came out this week. She made this growth speech, and she even mentioned AstraZeneca as one of the great growth stories in Britain at the time. And so I'm sure this is the last thing that she wanted to see. I mean, Jeremy Hunt also, who obviously negotiated the original deal, has also come out and said that it's a massive own goal by the government.
OK, Hannah, really appreciate that. Quite a story this afternoon. Going to have significant ramifications politically and economically. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Now, it's less than 2 weeks since Donald Trump came to power for the second time, promising sweeping changes to put America first. And among the more eye-catching ones was the plan to impose tariffs on Mexico, Canada and China, prompting fears, of course, of a new trade war. Well, from tomorrow, imports from America's closest neighbours, Canada and Mexico, are expected to hit 25% when it comes to tariffs. It's still unclear when and if China will face similar sanctions. So why are Canada and Mexico being targeted? Here's our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, to explain all.
So we all know that Donald Trump has said he's obsessed with tariffs. But why is he obsessed with imposing tariffs on Mexico and Canada? After all, there's the US, there's Mexico and Canada. If you think back to his first term, it was mostly China that he was talking about, wasn't it? It was the economic relationship with China. And actually, if you look at what happened with tariffs in that first term, and what's tariff? It's basically just a kind of block, like it's a tax on goods coming into your country. It was China and Vietnam that had the biggest tariffs. The higher these are, the higher the tariffs are. And interestingly, Joe Biden kept those tariffs in place. Vietnam, by the way, because that's used sometimes as a conduit for goods coming from China. But Mexico and Canada, still very low tariffs, and that's because they're part of this free trade agreement in North America. But have a look at this, OK? This is showing you how much is imported from the main trade partners into the US. And this was the case back in 2018. So this is the first Trump administration. China is in the lead, then Mexico, then Canada. Then those tariffs came into play. And have a look at this. That red bar goes down. So less coming in from China, but considerably more coming in from Mexico and more too coming in from Canada. And one of the things, to talk about that Mexico bar for a second, one of the things that Donald Trump really hates is deficits, when you're basically importing more than you're exporting to a country. And the deficit with Mexico has got bigger and bigger and bigger over time. And if you dig into the numbers, it's not just oil, it's goods, it's things like cars, precisely this kind of thing that the US would like to be making more of. So back to this chart, this map here, OK? So last time around, back in 2018, a lot of the trade from China was going directly into the US. Then those tariffs came into play. And now there's a suspicion that actually a lot of components, instead of going to the US, are going to Mexico and then being assembled into machinery and items and products that are going across the border. That's the suspicion here. And actually, if you look at how many cars are going from China into Mexico, that's been going up and up and up over time. Final thing, what kind of an impact would there be if those tariffs were to come in? Well, 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada. You're talking about a big hit for Canada. The bars are basically showing you how much GDP would go down. A big hit for Mexico as well. But interestingly, look, it's less bad for the US, but it's still bad. And it's negative too, even for the EU and for the rest of the world, underlining something that economists like to point to. Tariffs don't make anyone that much better off.
That was Ed Conway, who is live with us now, I'm delighted to say. Ed, Donald Trump said tariff was the most beautiful word in the English language, and he's not just all about words in this second term. We are probably, I mean, things can change at the last moment, going to see this quite significant moment tomorrow.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth saying, though, Darren, the one prevailing factor that we're all going to have to get our heads around over the course of the next 4 years is there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and no one really knows precisely what's going to happen. But I think one thing is clear, you know, we're in this new world, and you could see it there from some of the data we were showing you. Tariffs have been going up for a little while. In fact, they went up in the first Trump presidency. What's surprising, or I think for some people, is that Joe Biden didn't change that. The US stayed as protectionist. In fact, by some measures, it became even more protectionist, imposing extra tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. So we are in this new world, and Donald Trump is intent on taking it further, taking it one step or maybe many steps further. And I think, you know, if you think back to that final chart we were showing you at the end there, the impact on gross domestic product. I could have showed you another chart showing that inflation is likely to be higher as a result. Basically, plug in any economic model, and it says in the short run, if you put these tariffs on goods, particularly blanket tariffs on all sorts of things coming from Mexico and Canada, and indeed other countries as well, then your prices go up because things are getting more expensive, the currency goes down a touch, and crucially as well, growth, so the amount of income that you have, that goes down. It's destructive of economic activity. The flip side of that is, according to some economists, this is more, the unconventional ones, in the longer run, you might be able to rebuild parts of your economy. But that remains quite controversial, and most economists would say this is basically just value destruction. But Donald Trump is clear that he wants to use this both as a weapon, as a negotiating ploy, and we're going to see what happens. It's going to be a very interesting and destabilising rise for everyone.
And Ed, you probably saw what we were talking there at the top. This news that's emerged this afternoon from AstraZeneca. I mean, you were at Rachel Reeves' speech, weren't you, earlier on this week? I mean, in many ways, the timing could not be worse for the government.
Yeah, it's desperately unfortunate timing. They've been working on this. It sounds like this has been a negotiation that's been going on for quite some time. There were terms that were not quite agreed, but we negotiated with the previous government. They sound like they were more generous. They've become less generous, it seems, under the new government. But it comes back to this I think, deeper issue. First of all, the government, Rachel Reeves, they are desperate to show that Britain is open for business. But there is a competition, there is competition amongst many other countries around the world to try and attract companies to build new plants. And in the case of AstraZeneca, this is a British company with existing plants here. It was about expanding it, but it's decided based on everything, including the amount of money that the government was going to set forward, which it seems like wasn't enough, that they have chosen to go elsewhere. It's going to be the same thing. There are going to be these discussions with many other businesses. Think about steel. Think about what's going on there. The steel plants that are still remaining open up in Scunthorpe, there's big question marks over for how long they're going to be there. There's talks ongoing right now about how much money is going to go there. And there could well be closures yet to come. And it's difficult for the UK. It's competing in a global market. It's not easy. And as you say, coming only a couple of days after the Chancellor's big speech, which was about this stuff, it's about investment, it's about showing that Britain's open for business, it's awkward. And so, as I say, we'll see how this reverberates in the coming days.
Indeed. Ed, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Ed Conway there, our data and economics editor. Let's bring you up to date with some breaking news emerging from the Middle East in the last couple of minutes, and that is that the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, known as UNRWA, has responded to claims made on social media by the mother of the released British-Israeli hostage, Emily Damari, that she was held on UWRA premises. Well, this is what the statement has had to say. We have repeatedly called for independent investigations into claims of misuse and disregard of UN premises by Palestinian armed groups, including Hamas. And we'll have more on that story, of course, on the Sky News website. Now, can you believe it's only 5 years, I would say only, really? It seems a long time ago, since this. Indeed, having famously, of course, voted by 52% to 40% in 2016, the UK finally left the European Union at 11 p.m. UK time on the 31st of January 2020. Brexiteers claimed it would bring freedom and prosperity to the UK, while Remainers, of course, argued the opposite. So, 5 years on, are we any clearer on who was right? Well, let's speak to James Green. He's the director of the Whitstable Oyster Company, based in Kent, one of the oldest companies in the UK. A very good afternoon to you, James. 5 years on, how do you feel about Brexit?
I was one of the people who voted for Brexit, but it's basically I did that on fishing rights, and I live in a local fishing community, and that was important, but that didn't really come to fruition. And obviously, at the time, pre-breakfast, about half of our oyster production went over to France. We had many meetings with DEFRA over the course of the build-up to Brexit in January 2020 that assured us that that trade would continue, and then come the end of January 2020, that just went.
Entirely?
Completely, yeah. So grade B shellfish, you still can't export, or the EU will not import grade B shellfish. And I suppose, looking back, I thought, I think DEFRA thought we'd be a special case, but there's no countries that, import grade B shellfish into Europe. So there was no real reason why we would be any different, to be honest.
James, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but, there'll be people sat at home thinking, you voted for this. Did you not see this coming?
No, I did not. And I think, even, the 4 years of negotiations that went on prior, in between 2016, which was the vote, and 2020, which is when it actually happened, I had many meetings with DEFRA, and so did everybody in the shellfish industry in London, with everybody, and throughout that time, we were constantly assured that trade would continue. And it just didn't. And we still don't export into France at the moment.
So just spell out then, how difficult has this been for your business?
I mean, at the time, it was very difficult, because obviously we'd planned our production cycle based on still exporting that 50% to France, and that just went. And then, of course, coupled with COVID, and then coupled with water quality issues we've had since then, the last 5 years have been tough for the shellfish industry.
And are you one of the people now, James, who says, hold on a second here, why don't we try and get a better deal with the EU? Why don't we go back? Why doesn't Keir Starmer go back to Brussels and try and see if we can get a better trade deal, even if that means we have to give a little bit more in other areas?
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously kept on trying to export to France, and it's difficult, and the French do not make it easy for us to do that. We have to have health certificates. We've had a lot of paperwork, so anything that would make that easier would, of course, be a benefit to us. But there's no magic bullet to that. I mean, the part of the Brexit car crash from DEFRA was that they looked into trying to reclassify some of the shellfish growing areas. So we were always a grade B. They actually have done that. So the FSA have reclassified some of our areas as grade A for parts of the year, which would mean actually we can export to France at certain times of year.
And what would you say to those? Yeah, but James, what do you say to those people? This was kind of the point of Brexit. We find new markets. That businesses actually don't have to look to Europe. You can sell elsewhere. I mean, is that even possible for you?
Yeah, so, I mean, post-Brexit, so 2020, we opened up a market in Hong Kong. We were doing quite well up until June 2020. Unfortunately, due to, I suppose, it was when people came back for coronavirus. So we always test for norovirus at certain times of year through the winter, because it was always a winter disease. The epidemiology of that changed, and it was obviously present in June, July. We sent oysters to Hong Kong. We obviously were some of those oysters made some people in Hong Kong. That market shut. That didn't reopen for 3-4 years. So we were actively looking at new markets, but that's a long process.
And it's not.
And we did do that, and that shut, and that hasn't reopened either.
Yeah, it's not easy. James, really appreciate your time this afternoon. That's James Green there, the director of the Whitstable Oyster Company in Kent. Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, you're watching Business Live. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, it's the markets. All the details in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
I'm Deborah Haynes, Sky Security and Defence Editor. The reality of life under Russian fire. People don't want to leave, even though help is here to evacuate them. They say they want to sort out their belongings first. It's absolute chaos. Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety, as Russian drones will be trying to find this position.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I've been covering Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
When rockets fall, I try to hide my head under my toys.
Illustrating Ukraine's lost childhood, hopes and dreams framed by war. Conflict in the Middle East is another major focus.
An incredibly dangerous moment. We saw the missiles streaking across the sky. We saw the intercept going up, and then we saw the explosions when the intercepts were successful.
With global threats rising, I also explored defence and security in the UK and across NATO. This US aircraft carrier is operating in European waters in a deliberate show of force. This is routine training for NATO, but should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real. Tucked away in the National Archives are some of the UK's old defence plans. The scale of this bunker underlines how seriously governments took the threat of nuclear attack and global conflict.
Should allies listen to Vladimir Putin's sabre-rattling?
No, they shouldn't, and they don't.
Sky News, the full story first.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Very welcome back. Let's have a look at how the markets are doing on this Friday afternoon. And Europe was on course to outperform its global rivals, including Wall Street in January. Bit of a mixed picture this afternoon, but fair to say that most of the European indices have had a pretty strong start to the year. FTSE's also done pretty well, nearing some record highs. It's up today at 0.31%. Meanwhile, let's look at the currencies, and it's good news for sterling, up against the dollar there at 124 and also against the euro at 120. Well, let's speak to Sri Kushivagindan, who is a senior research economist at Aberdeen. Very good afternoon to you. Let's talk, if we can, about Brexit. It's not been, not been great kind of thinking back at the trauma we all went through for many years. What's your sense of where we are 5 years on?
Well, I think the impact of Brexit started even before we exited. So immediately after the referendum, we saw a hit to the currency. There was a lot of uncertainty. Business confidence was hit. And that in turn impacted investment decisions. Many projects were postponed or cancelled completely. So that was immediately after the referendum. We had a very long negotiation process. And as we already heard, we exited January 2020. And then since then, there have been a number of estimates that have tried to look at what is the actual impact on GDP growth for the UK. What is the difference between staying in and the fact that we've actually left? And a number of studies have estimated that there's been a hit around 2 to 3% to GDP. We're actually a bit lower than we would have been if we had stayed in. Now, more importantly, going forward, the Office for Budget Responsibility has said that the outlook is that there'll be a continued drag from the fact that we are outside the European Union, that we've gone through Brexit. So that drag is around 4% over the course of the next few years. So, there is an expected hit to growth, a hit to productivity, and there have been some labour shortages.
But isn't that why, though, people look at what's happening in the United States? They've had a pretty robust economy for the past decade and say, you know what, maybe we should try and align closer with the United States because look at how well they're doing in comparison to France and Germany, for example.
Yes, we have tried to, outside of the European Union, we've tried to negotiate trade deals. And what's happened actually is that it's taken a long time. And then it's easier to actually negotiate within a bigger group. I think that's the overall experience that we've seen in the last 5 years. And really, we need to have some sort of bargaining power in order to trade with the US. our biggest trading partner has been the European Union. And that's why it's such a shame and such a hit to UK growth, because we've had all these extra trade barriers, regulatory issues, border controls, and this is actually having quite, as we've already heard from traders in Whitstable.
And just very finally, looking ahead to next week, interest rate decision here in the UK. Were you looking at a cut?
Yes, it does make sense for the Bank of England to cut. If you think back to December, it was a very close vote. There was 3 dissenters out of the 9 voters. And there is a lot of, there's a good case in terms of GDP growth has been quite flat recent months. Inflation is trending lower, but interestingly, they are more focused on the growth outlook now, whereas the previous priority was inflation. Now they're going to be looking at supporting growth. So everything is lining up for a cut next week.
Well,
indeed.
Yeah, we will wait and watch for that decision from the Bank of England. OK, thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Just to say, by the way, you would have just seen on your screen there that actually there's going to be a press conference from Washington in the next couple of minutes. We will bring you that live here on Sky News following that plane crash. Jonathan Samuels is anchoring the News Hour from there. Matt Bobette is here in London with the rest of today's news. I'm back, of course, on Monday at 11:30 for another Business Live. Until then, have a nice evening and a good weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep